Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Praetor Magic. This is Reflections of the Council, our live podcast here on every Mondays on twitch.tv/Praetor Magic. I'm your host, DM Cross, joined by Frexian Walker and Magical Hacker as per usual. Hacker, how are you doing tonight?
Doing pretty great. It's a great Monday. It's a good day to be alive.
Well, maybe. But Frexian, how are you doing?
I'm at least 70% more awake than you are, so I'm doing pretty well.
Look, okay, it's not that hard to be any percentage more awake than I am because, again, as we were saying during the pre-gaming, I pretty much spent most of last night catching Pokemon on Let's Go. However, that is not the point to this podcast. This podcast is to talk about Magic the Gathering, and it is brought to you by our friends over at inkedgaming.com, which we are now sponsored by. So if you go down below the stream, or if you go below the video or the audio, depending on where you're listening to us, if you're listening to the recording, you can find a link. If you use that link to go and buy your playmats, dice bags, or mouse pads, it helps us out. And you can use the Praetor10, Praetor10 coupon code for 10% off, which also helps us. So support the show and buy some cool stuff.
So, buy some dice.
Buy some dice. That's just okay. So what we're talking about this week is we try to kind of stay with current events. I think I've said that before. And one of the more unique current events that's happening right now is that Wizards of the Coast announced that starting in MagicFest London, they're going to be changing, or they're going to be looking into changing, I should say, the Mulligan rules. So this is kind of a surprise because I think the current Mulligans that we have is only a couple years old. Is that correct?
It wasn't 2015?
Yeah, it wasn't
too old. It wasn't too long ago. Yeah.
Hold on. Research time.
Well, while he's doing that, it wasn't too long ago, I know, because I was playing during the change, so it can't have been that long to where we got the Mulligan and then the Scry 1. Now, the new rule is talking about when you Mulligan, you pick up 7 new cards, and when you're you pick up 7 new cards as many times as you want, and then when you're done, you put a card back for every time you've Mulligan. So, if you look at 7 and you don't like them, you put them back. You pick up 7 again. If you do like them, you put 1 back. If you don't, you put those back, pick up again, and then you put 2 back. So you'd be down to 5 because you twice.
Got there. September 2015.
Oh wow! Look at you.
In the Battle of Zendikar pre-release.
Were you like in that pre-release? Is that how you remember?
I did play in the Battle for Zendikar pre-release. I don't know if that's how I remembered, or I just randomly pulled a date to be right. But you know what? I was right. That's all that matters.
Maybe you're just a huge nerd.
We were talking about Star Trek and Star Wars and Rick and Morty before. I think we're all huge nerds.
You guys are talking about Rick and Morty. I am not that. You know what? Never mind. This is not that kind of podcast. So
it's not. Talk about Mulligans.
The big hurrah, I think, over the new Mulligan rule is because it wouldn't just be standard. It would be for pretty much all formats. It would just be the way that you Mulligan. I believe it was the modern players who just basically are like, this is crazy because you're digging even further into your deck, or you're seeing more cards for chance and getting better card selection. Mm-hmm. So, the Mulligan cards go on the bottom, I believe. You don't shuffle them in. I believe they go on the bottom.
They do go on the bottom.
Yes.
So you're getting the most amount of card selection that you could possibly get, unless it would be like Scry 3 instead of put 3 back on your third Mulligan. That's probably the only way it could be more broken, because then you could set up the top even more, along with card filtering. So unfortunately I don't have a lot of time to go playing paper, so I haven't tested it in actual games, but I have been goldfishing with a lot of my decks and just setting up, basically seeing how more consistent, I guess, my hands get for like a turn 4 big play or something like that. And I did notice that with my Muldrotha and my Lord Windgrace deck, that they both felt a lot better with it, because again, like, if you were to Mulligan down the 5 and Scry 1, you're not seeing the card underneath. But with this rule, you basically do get to see it. You don't get to keep it, but you're just, I don't know, it's kind of weird. I did feel it was more consistent, but I can't really put in the words on why I thought it was more consistent.
Well, I mean, there is, if you look at just the numbers, you are seeing more cards. So, like, in Commander, you have the first hand 7, second hand is 7, third hand currently is 6, plus you see the one card, or since we're in the Vancouver Mulligan, so that's technically you're seeing 7 cards as well. It's only once you've mulliganed 3 times that you get to see 1 additional card. Then the 4th time you get to see 2 additional cards. So after already seeing 7 plus 7 plus 7 plus 7 plus 7, 35, difference between 35 and 33 is not as big of a deal, in my opinion. So I don't know if it's really a focus on the numbers, but people have been talking about how they're really afraid of how this is going to increase the power of those Grenzo decks. But then again, like, is Grenzo really dominating tables that badly anyways? And that is Grenzo Dungeon Warden. I can go ahead and read that for you if you want me to, Seth.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll bring it up.
It's a X, a black, and a red for a legendary 2/2 Goblin Rogue that enters the battlefield with X plus one counters on it. And then here's the kicker, not literally the kicker, but here's the reason why people are afraid of it. You can pay 2 generic mana in order to put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. If it's a creature card with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, put it onto the battlefield. So the idea is with Grenzo, you can choose to mulligan down like on purpose just so you can kind of order your bottom of your library. But it feels like, is it really worth, losing cards in your starting hand to do that? I don't think so, but what do you guys think?
I guess if the cards that you're putting to the bottom could potentially help you draw, it does kind of become a non-issue that you're mulliganing, like a Disciple of Bolus or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's kind of weird because I didn't see too many. Like, I saw Commander players talking about the mulligan rule, but most of them were still talking about it in terms of the Eternal formats like Legacy and
Right.
Modern, which I don't really play either one of those, so I don't really get it. But Rexine, did you ever play Modern? I thought you said you played something.
I've played Modern in the past. I haven't played it much in the last year and a half, though.
Well, so
I had a Tron deck and an Infect deck, so I was a great person to play Modern with.
The worst kind of human being. You're literally like, I'm gonna drop off this call.
Living up to his name.
The Infect doesn't bother you, admit it. It's the Tron that bothers you.
Yeah, like what's no? I don't have it's a big hot take right now. I don't have an opinion on Tron. I don't really care. I get that it's probably a modern thing, but for like Commander, Tron wouldn't matter much unless you naturally draw it.
For Modern, it matters a lot.
Yeah, well, Modern's a silly format.
This mulligan really does help decks in Modern, like Tron, like some of your combo decks, or even if it goes into Legacy. I mean, you're talking Legacy Dredge. This helps a lot of decks like that. The combo-y decks, the decks that are looking for a set of specific cards to start off and make sure that they're going well. Because you might not have thought about it too much, but I'm a math guy. So while you were sitting there, piddling around with your Windgrace deck and your Muldrotha deck and your other decks, just trying to, figure it out, I was out there, doing some math and looking up some math on the statistics of this. And it really does, just from, like, roughly, if you're talking about a good opening hand where you want 2 playable spells and 2 lands to start off with. You just want those 4 cards to make sure you can get started in a game of Modern or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's roughly going to happen 84% of the time if in your first 7 card hand you draw in a deck. Now, if you mulligan to 6, that goes down to 74%. If you mulligan to 5, that goes down to 59%, which is why people talk about, like, if you mulligan down to 5, like, you're pretty much in an unwinnable situation, which is why they've started looking at adjusting the mulligan rule, right? Is because, you have these big name players and these pro players who end up having to mull to 5 because of some bad luck, quote unquote, and then they end up in a situation where they basically preclude themselves to being unlikely to win the game. Because they're at a card disadvantage, but they're also at a disadvantage in terms of, like, even do they have enough keepables in your hand? Because we've all been in that situation playing Commander or any other format where you start off with 7, you're like, oh, I can't keep this. Then you mulligan down to 6, and you're like, well, crap, now I have 1 land. I really can't keep this. And then you mulligan to 5, and you're like, well, I have 2 lands and nothing I can actually play, and I'm missing one of my colors, but you know what? I can't go down to 4.
Right.
We all end up in those situations. Whereas this, like, you always have that same 84% chance of finding those 4 playable cards. It's always the same 84% chance because you're always seeing 7 cards and you get to pick the 4 of them you want. That's the really important part, is that you get to not only you get to see all of them, but you are crafting like, these are the 4 that I want to keep, so I can keep these, 2 lands, this rampant growth, and this, these couple other cards, and make sure I can actually play, as opposed to, just
being locked
luck
out
of the
the
draw.
Yeah.
Does another huge part of it become, or is also because of the fact that like those formats you can obviously run 4 ofs? Is that like a huge part of the math too? Because if you're like you're saying, like you only need the 2 lands and 2 castable spells, and you have a much broader percentage. One, your deck's smaller, right? So it's a 60 card deck as opposed to 100. So that changes the stats just in the 2 formats. But then in Modern Legacy, you can run 4 ofs. So if you're running a bunch of 4 ofs that you just want to be able to cast early on, it obviously increases your chance to get them because there's more of them in the smaller deck.
If you were looking for just a specific card, probably looking at around, like, if you go through 2 or 3 mulligans in the old system, you're probably looking at like 80% chance of having seen that card, whereas this is probably closer to an 86 to 90% chance in the new mulligan system, which doesn't seem like huge because it's like, oh, that's like 6 to 10%, but that's pretty huge in terms of a statistical variance.
Yeah, because you're chopping the percentage that it won't happen like by half. So it's like half as many times where you won't see it if you're going from 80 to 90.
Yeah, so it's pretty statistically significant in the way it does help you if you're looking for that specific card. And people have talked about that, and people have talked about how that really gives combo decks an advantage, perhaps, in the new mulligan system, just because they can look for their combo pieces a lot more effectively now. But at the same time, if you're a heavily reliable combo deck, it also, like, a lot of people have talked about the sideboarding aspect of it, that, like,
now it's easier to shut them down too.
Now it's easier to shut them down because I can just sideboard until I find my ley line in my opening hand, and then drop my ley line and be like, hey, combo done.
Yeah,
Dredge
and that's
now.
I think a little bit different between the partial Paris too. Partial Paris was helping combo decks on a different spectrum, where it was like it was making combo pieces be able to be in the same hand together more often. Because instead of changing the entirety of your hand, you were then allowed to keep what was good and get rid of what was bad, and that I think was what really put partial Paris over the top.
I think for partial Paris, it was just the control that you had over you were sculpting, quote unquote, your hand at that point. And I think that's also why they kind of went away from it, which I never actually knew about partial Paris until I played Commander. So was that actually like a thing in like standard?
I don't think so. But I looked on that on the article where they mentioned it, and they talked about comparing it to the Paris mulligan. So I don't know if partial Paris was specific to Commander and Paris was something that they did in like regular Magic at some point. But it looks like they talk about that.
Partial Paris was only used in Commander. Yeah, it was never used in another format.
Okay. Because I would see people having a huge, well, obviously some people would love it, but I could see a lot of people having a huge problem with partial Paris.
It would be completely broken in like
every other
structured format.
You basically,
it's pretty great in Commander. Like it's probably too good even for Commander, but like when you're talking 4 ofs and
it makes every game into like what's the best that your deck can do, and every game is that.
Which there are people who are arguing that this is doing a lot of the same things, though. That, I mean, not as strong as partial Paris would be if you were doing that, but there are people who are arguing that it really does give you an opportunity, like too much of an opportunity to be able to sculpt your hand. And one thing I do like, though, is it is like it's statistically encouraging to see like mulligans are actually more viable.
Yeah.
I think on a whole, I'm not a big fan of it, because I think it also encourages, in particular in formats like Commander and like more casual formats, like in Modern and Legacy and Standard, you already have the decks, and there's very little variability in the decks. So like if you should be running 26 lands, you're probably already running 26 lands, because every other deck that is based on the same type as you is running 26 lands. I mean, you might run one more or one less, just depending, but usually the land count is the same between the top tier decks. So that's not going to be a big deal. But in Commander, I do feel like it kind of the same thing that the partial Paris mulligan did it kind of encourages some lazy deck building and some trying to cheat on mana and stuff and being like, oh, well, I'm going to run 35 lands now because I know I can have a much better chance of just drawing 7 cards, shuffling up, drawing another 7 cards, and there you go. I got my 3 lands in the second hand. So, yeah, now I have 1 less card, but hey, I've got my lands and I'm running less lands, so I have more cool stuff to play. I do worry about that in like a format like Commander. I don't think that plays into constructed play at all, but I worry about it in like your casual formats.
So I agree with you that that's what the partial Paris Mulligan did, because you were able to sculpt your hand in a way that you were able to have more control over the ratio. Like if you drew, let's say you were playing very low number of lands and you just happened to draw 7 cards that was 6 lands and 1, you could get rid of a bunch of those lands and you could be very, very comfortable knowing that you're not going to draw more lands besides the one that after you've already gotten rid of those. But I think the difference between partial Paris and the London Mulligan, while the partial Paris Mulligan allows you to modify the ratio of lands to non-lands in your opening hand by allowing you to keep certain cards, I don't think that's going to happen with the London Mulligan, simply because of the fact that you're drawing a whole new hand, totally 7 new cards. So again, if the first hand you only drew 2 cards, 2 lands, then or because I typically like to keep ones that have 3 lands or more. Let's say you only have 2 lands in your opening hand, you get rid of them. If you're not playing enough lands, you're increasing the chance that you'll have to mulligan more often. And you are losing cards. You are having fewer cards in your opening hand. And everybody loves drawing cards. Everybody loves having a full grip at all times. So I don't think that it's smart to modify the ratio of lands you're playing when you have the London Mulligan. But that's just me. What do you think, Seth?
I think, and I feel like Frexon is probably going to back this up, that for the most part you shouldn't really be messing with your land count in the first place. It doesn't.
Yeah,
it really doesn't matter what mulligan you're using. If you're using the current mulligan, the Vancouver, the partial Paris, or the London, I guess we're gonna call it London Mulligan for now.
Yeah, it's London.
I don't think that super matters. Like it's just it's a statistic thing, right? Like how often will your land show up if you run the average, below average, or above average? And like it doesn't. The mulligan only affects your opening hand, as well. I guess that's not 100% true, but it mostly affects your opening hand. The rest of the game is so up in the air, especially in Commander, that I don't think you're gonna be like. I just don't. I understand what Frexon says when it encourages bad land stuff, but to me, like that's just kind of asinine anyway, because you shouldn't be doing that.
Well, I mean, yes, you shouldn't, but it encourages people to do things. One thing Frexon hates is things that encourage people to try bad deck building or bad play ideas.
Unless people learn from those experiences, they try it out and they're like, "Oh gosh, I was a fool for doing that."
I feel like people, especially when they have an idea on how something should work, people will defend it like viciously. Like, so if they will, statistically, I should get, that was just a bad game. That was just a bad mulligan. Statistically, I should be okay. And I like that a lot of times, and this is not a Magic the Gathering comment, but I hear people say statistically a lot, and then when you ask them to break down the math of their statistically thinking, that's not how math works. So that's always kind of fun.
But, hey, Frexon is a mathematician, and he's breaking down the math for you today.
Are you saying that people like to form their opinions based off what they want to be true instead of looking out in the world and trying to discover what's actually true?
People would never do that. That's a lie.
People would never do that. You all know I think people are the worst, right? Like, as a group, people are the worst. An individual is fine. People are the worst.
Spoken like a true black player. Spoken like a true black player.
You know what? Well, if you all died a living death, then I'm fine with
it. What if you died a living death, Seth?
Then I'm going out the best way ever.
There you go.
I lived as I died by dying while living while dying. Or something.
But, I mean, I think in this case you do have a lot of statistical evidence, though, that it is significantly better statistically than the Vancouver Mulligan.
Yeah, and
now, I don't know whether that significance is great enough that's going to negatively impact the game. I certainly don't worry about limited or standard or even that much about casual formats. My biggest worry in casual formats is just going to encourage people to do some of those things that they should not do. They're going to say, oh, I'm only running 35 lands, but it works out fine half the time. but they're mulliganing down to 5 or 6 every game, and then but in doing so, with being able to tuck the 2 cards and keep the lands, they end up with an okay starting hand.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when they're having to mulligan to 5 or 6 every game, that's hurting them still, even if they don't it mitigates the damage sort of. So you don't. It's not as pronounced. It's not, I'm mulliganing down to 5, and then I'm screwed, and I'm land screwed, and I can't do anything all game. It's, I mulligan down to 5, but because of this mulligan system, I'm fine. So that's the main thing I worry about in those formats. I mean, it's really like Modern and Legacy and those formats where there's so many already dangerous established combo decks already that see such prevalence in play, that I really think that this just gives them an extra edge to just in terms of their consistency. Like some of those decks that are already good, if you take them and make them more consistent, it's like Tron and Modern. Take it and make Tron almost a guaranteed thing by turn 3. Because that's basically what you're doing with being able to sculpt this way. Because it's like, hey, I can get it would be very hard statistically to not get 2 of the Tron lands in like an expedition map. Or even 3 of the Tron lands, like all 3. It's not outside the realm of possibility. You're probably talking about 65-ish%, I think, when I did the math, of getting all 3 Tron lands if you mull down to 4. Like, on your way down to 4, like 7 to 6 to 5 to 4, in one of those hands, you will have the 3 Tron lands.
Yeah, but
65 to 70% of the time.
Yeah, but even still, like, so if you mulligan down that far, and this isn't new to. Oh, I guess because you get the extra cards to select from. My comment was going to be that if you mull down that far, you're still going to have the problem of, like, yeah, you're going to get your 3 lands, but then you're only going to get 1 card. But with this, you get to see the other 3 cards, I guess, is why it's stronger here. So that 1 card is going to be the card that you want.
Yeah, that 1 card is going to be the Karn. It's going to be it's going to be the card that you want with that Tron land to be like, bam, we're done. Let's play Magic. Karn on turn 3.
Yeah. Do you think that it's going to encourage people to mulligan? Now people are going to not want to keep those kind of iffy hands as much because they're like, okay, well, I can get down to 7 and I can pick whatever I want.
I mean, like I said, when you're looking at like 84% of having a keeping hand regardless of what you do versus like going down in percentages every time you mulligan, I think 100% like people who really understand the math and understand the statistics behind it are going to do it. Like there's the whole thing of the Monty Hall problem, right? In mathematics, where you have the Monty Hall show where they give you the 3 doors and it's like, oh, you pick this door. Well, let's get rid of this door. Now, do you want to trade? And the answer is
always yes, even though you don't
always
think so.
Yes. Yeah. Like people don't think so, but they've actually given you like a 67% chance as opposed to a 50-50. People think it's a 50-50 shot, but if you trade, you actually have a 67% chance of winning. Whereas if you stick with the original choice, you have a 33% chance winning. This is sort of the same thing with the hands, just because you're getting those more options than you didn't have before with the Vancouver Mulligan system.
Yeah, and
I'm going very math nerd right now. If I'm going too much math nerd,
personally, I love math too, and the Monty Hall problem is one of the ones that like really brought me into like, oh man, this is really cool because it's like totally blows your mind when you learn about it for the first time. And I do think that this, you were saying that it might encourage people to build their decks wrong. But I'm actually thinking now, after you're mentioning this, it might encourage people to mulligan wrong, where they're being encouraged to mulligan because they don't like their hand enough. Like, oh, I've got those 2 lands, I've got playable things, but it's not as flashy as I want my hand to be, so I'm going to mulligan because I can always find 7 more cards. I think the issue is that you're still losing card advantage by doing that. And so unless your commander is like Kozilek, the Great Distortion, where when you cast it, you'll draw back up to 7 anyways, and you're just trying to find a way to get Kozilek out like turn 4 or 5 or something, then I think other than that, we should still be mulliganing in that same understanding. Like, okay, is it worth it now to have fewer cards in the hand?
And I think if you're talking about formats like Commander, that's true. But if you're talking about formats like Legacy and Modern, where the right 5 cards is better than a 7-card hand. I mean, in if you're talking Tron in Modern, if you're talking, Dredge in Legacy, if you're talking some of those current top tier decks in the meta, the right 5 cards in one of those decks, or even the right 4 cards in one of those decks, is better than an OK 7. So while in certain formats, I think you're right that it's going to encourage people to be greedy and that's going to hurt them. In formats like in your constructed formats, particularly your competitive, more established with a bigger card pool like Modern and Legacy, you're gonna see advantages to doing that.
Yeah. What do you think, DM?
I mean, I think even with Commander, it's still going to be a factor because there's a lot of redundancy you can have in Commander.
Yeah.
I know we can't run 4-ofs, but we can get the same effect a lot of times for the same amount of mana. I don't remember if it was before we started streaming or after, but like I mentioned Kadama's Reach just as in a completely unrelated topic, but Kadama's Reach, and then you have Cultivate, right?
Yep.
So you have redundancy effects. So I think it does still factor in, even though you can't have 4-ofs and you can't have like the 4 cards that you, quote unquote,
Right.
the exact 4 cards that you need. You can still have the 4 effects, let's say, whether it's those effects are just dropping lands or drawing cards or whatever. I think that's still going to factor in. So I don't think Commander, when you build your deck with redundancy in mind, is a big deal. But I do know there are people out there who are either, not that they don't build for redundancy, but they build just their decks, I guess, a little bit more focused on like what they want to do or something like that. And then you have like new players where Commander is a very weird format to build for. Again, because you go from pretty much every format having 4-ofs and whatnot to the singleton, and then you have to find ways to find that redundancy. So I think that'll come into play as well, at least for newer players.
Yeah.
I do struggle, and this is something I think about pretty much anytime there's a change in the game, rules-wise or otherwise, or like mechanical-wise or whatever. One of the biggest things I worry about is new players, because the best way to convert people to playing Magic is to be able to explain it to them. And that's like one of the things I struggle with all the time with Commander players. I've taught people how to play Magic Commander first as opposed to Standard, and it completely messes with them. You could tell right off the bat, like because Commander is such a weird thing.
It's not appealing. It's just too much to keep track of, and they're like, "Yeah, this game's not for me," and they're kind of shut off from Magic even after that. It's like they have to relearn how Magic can also be simple after learning how it can be complex.
Yeah. So when it's stuff like these rules changing, because again, we were talking about, we went to the Vancouver, 4 years ago now, or less than 4 years ago, because it was in September, so like 3 years and some months. So now we're changing it again, and I don't know.
Well, we have to be careful to mention that this is a test run.
That's true.
Now, every time they've done a test run in the past on one of these Mulligan systems, they have adopted the new system, and because it is one of those things where they're always doing it for like months at Wizards R&D before they actually release it.
Yeah, they've probably been play testing this.
They aren't going to release something that they haven't vetted pretty significantly.
I will say that with the play design team that they have now, which is not quite 4 years old. I don't think it's even 3 years old. I think it's only like 2 years old. They Wizards originally like created like a play design team, which was supposed to help like balancing standards and stuff. It was kind of I think it was actually announced or started or initiated right around the Kaladesh disaster that happened 2 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
So now that they have that, maybe this is kind of like a result of that, of them getting this idea and trying it for a while, and they're like, okay, we've worked out all the kinks and blah blah blah, and like maybe the original idea was a little different, and they tweaked it to this and smoothed it out, and now we're gonna see it in the wild. So just kind of a shout out to Wizards for putting that kind of time and effort into it, because I'm sure for every successful idea or like idea that makes it past them to get to us, there's got to be like 5 failed ideas or 5 ideas that just were like, you know what, either it didn't work out the way we wanted to, or it's not for Magic right now, so we'll shove it for later or something, or just stuff that is blatantly a disaster.
Right.
Kind of crazy.
Now I didn't know if this was something that they answered later on, but looking at the article, I'm not really sure. Is this specifically only for limited or only for modern, or is it for both? Because they said that they're making a wild weekend for limited at the Mythic Championship, and so they're testing out the best of the best in a brand new format. So is this just for modern, or is it just limited? Do you guys know?
I think that's part of the fact that it's a test. I don't think it's going to be for anything except to see if it works, and then they'll give you more details.
Are they testing it in both of those aspects, or are they only testing it in one? Because here's why I was going to say that. If they're only testing it with modern, I think they're probably not going to, add it to the game. But if they're only testing it for limited, that's also an issue, because now they're not really getting that full view of if it's actually worth adding to the game. Because I think the worst thing they could do is say, for these formats, yes. For these formats, no, because that's just going to increase the complexity way up for new players.
I don't think they'll do that.
I
because
hope
of
they
that
don't.
reason.
I
I
hope they
can't
don't.
see them doing that. And the reason why I say that is because, again, when I was learning Commander, and the rules committee kind of, I think, said you could still do like partial pairs for a little while, even after we did move to Vancouver. Because I know my table did it for a while, and this is going to bring up another part of the conversation that we were going to talk about anyway. But my table did it basically to help people, our newer players, get better hands. Right. And that was okay by the rules committee. And then, like, I think maybe people complained that they never understood, like, how do I go to a new group and know what I'm doing? Like, it kind of made the format not as fluid to, like, move around with.
People. Right.
So they kind of scrapped that and were like, no, just do the Vancouver from now. And that's the quote unquote official way. Of course, noting that I would say official in the way that, like, hey, that's how you have to play on an MTGO, because everybody's allowed to kind of do their own thing that they want at their table.
But
yeah.
for MTGO, it has to follow the official rules.
Yeah, so they made that the official way. So I would hope that Wizards, seeing that, well, so I don't even know who actually, like, locked that in. Was it because Wizards did it on MTGO and they're just like, this is how we're gonna run it, because that way we don't have to code a new Mulligan rule for this program that everybody is always joking that they can't customize in the first place? Or did the rules committee say okay and then Wizards implement it? I don't know which came first, chicken or the egg. But I would, if it wasn't the Wizards who did it, if it was the rules committee who said it, I would think that Wizards should take a page from their book and just keep everything simple. If you're going to have a Mulligan rule, you have to test it on all your formats that you're going to officially have, like, represented, and then if it's good on all those, great. If it's not good on all those, I don't think the right answer is to go like, oh, well, this format can have it, but these other formats are going to stay Vancouver, because again, you're creating like a higher now ceiling of understanding that you have to play Magic across the board. How many people play all kinds of formats? I don't know. I don't even play all the formats. I've never played Legacy before in my life. I don't really like Modern. I've played like 2 games of Pauper, and Standard is awful to me. But I play a lot of Commander. There are people who think the same thing about Commander, that it's awful, but they will play pretty much any other like 60 card format.
Some people only play Cube and only play Limited. You know, lots
those
of
people are. What are they even doing?
I've played every format except Legacy and Vintage at some point.
That's so because you're a teacher and you're on a teacher's salary.
Yeah, I'll never play Legacy or Vintage, but even Modern was a pricey endeavor to get into.
Yeah.
I hear it's a little bit better now, but I also don't care enough to look. The blatant honesty is I don't care enough to look into deck prices.
And one thing we haven't talked about yet with this new Mulligan rule is in the announcement, they did talk about the potential, not the certainty, but the potential of some cards getting banned under this new Mulligan system if it were to be enacted.
I don't even remember that part. Did they give examples?
I don't think they gave examples. I think they said that they'd be looking into it as the format adjusted, just because they could see the potential of certain cards getting too powerful when they can be gotten very consistently. A lot of people speculated that they're talking about Legacy and Modern when they talked about that, but
how does like the Mulligan rule work with like Nexus of Fate? Because it's pre-game, right? So it doesn't count as you don't shuffle your deck.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait. What do you mean Nexus of Fate?
Because Nexus of Fate shuffles itself back in, so I don't know.
Only if it goes into your discard.
Right?
Yeah, this is going at the bottom of your library.
Yeah, it's going at the bottom of your library. Okay. So it wouldn't affect that, but like I don't know I don't know what cards it would be. I mean, really, but just what I find worrisome is I don't like anything that like increases the ban list.
Serum powder.
Yeah. I don't feel like it's healthy when you have to increase the ban list when.
Well, here's I think like what they're thinking,
causing you to have to ban more cards.
Here's something that I think is actually why they might be interested in that, because right now maybe there are certain games that you lose just because somebody happened to draw the right things. If you can make it more consistent for somebody to draw the right things, maybe it's better to have the game be more consistent and not as swingy than to have it be less consistent and more swingy. So if you were to play a game of Modern and your opponent happened to get their hand that's like amazing, and you're like, well, I guess I lost because they just happened to draw the right cards, like, and I couldn't even do anything no matter what deck I was playing. Versus something happening where they make everything more consistent. They realize, okay, now we can see that card XYZ is a problem because of how consistent it is. We can actually take it out there, and instead of games being like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down with that certain deck, now it's a little bit more flat, more even. It's less Hearthstone, you know?
Yeah, I don't know, because I think Commander is one of the only formats where less consistency is encouraged. Like in Modern, you don't want less, and it's because of the social contract of EDH, right? You have 4 players. You don't want it to be where every time player A gets to turn 5 and he kept the right hand, he wins the game. You don't want that in a social format, but in a competitive format, that's
exactly what you want.
Yeah, I mean, as the player, you do now. Do you want it to be that? I mean, as long as there are multiple decks that can win around the same time or disrupt each other, you do want that consistency, right?
Sure, right.
I really think regardless of the way it goes, the meta will adjust itself, though. So I don't know. I guess you have had a couple of times in Magic history, and I've lived through a couple of them where it became the case where you had deck A, deck B, and everyone who was playing deck A was playing deck A because it was that good, and everyone who was playing deck B was because it was the one answer to deck A. So I get that you never want that to happen.
After every artifact set ever? Is that what we're talking about? Those instances?
Well, it wasn't just then because it was after World War II with old Jace.
Mm-hmm. And it was kind of with
everyone was playing blue-white control or the counter to blue-white control, which was super aggro.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that kind of how standard is right now? Is blue-white control still like the super? Or the
blue-white control has came back around, with Nexus
pretty diverse. It's not that bad. It's
not that bad yet, but
oh yeah, it could devolve.
It definitely has the potential to go that way.
Yeah. Speaking of potentials,
the Mulligan rule is would affect that as so much as some other things.
Yeah. Speaking of potentials, you looked up serum powder, Seth?
Yeah, Mick in the chat mentioned this. This is a 3-mana artifact. It has tap for a colorless mana to your mana pool. Anytime you can mulligan and serum powder is in your hand, you may exile all cards from your hand and then draw that many cards. So
now, do you want to read what they said about serum powder specifically? Because Ian Duke added a couple of paragraphs on serum powder on February 26th. So this was after the article was already out. He added something about serum powder to kind of clarify. Do you want to read that right now?
You don't have to read it word for word, but if you want to try to paraphrase it.
Yeah, so they were trying to say, does it happen after you keep your hand, or does it happen before you keep your hand that you can use the serum powder? So this is what it says here. For example, if you mulligan twice, then the third set of 7 cards that you see contains a serum powder. You'll have to first put 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your library. Then, assuming you still have that serum powder in your hand, you can then choose to exile your hand and draw 5 new cards, mulligan again, or keep your hand. So this is consistent. He says here, this is consistent with how serum powder has always functioned and with what we believe to be the spirit and intent of the card. Serum powder was printed after the adoption of the Paris mulligan, so successive mulligans have always reduced the number of cards serum powder lets you draw. The same will be true under the London mulligan. And he has an official wording for what it's going to work with serum powder, which I can paste here really quick into the chat for everybody to see.
So that's kind of crazy, right? So you put 2 cards. You put the 2 cards that you want to keep in your deck on the bottom. You exile the 5 cards because they don't come back. It's legit just exile. So you actually thin your deck out 5 in that scenario, 5 cards.
It actually makes serum powder better because now you can not exile all the cards in your hand.
Yeah, because you get to select the ones that go to the bottom
that you get to save, you get to keep.
Yeah. That's kind of crazy. And again,
I kind of like it though.
Thinning your deck 5 cards is in a 60-card format when you're going to also draw 5 more. So you get to see 10 cards there. Or no, 12 because you put 2 on the bottom, right?
Right, but you do lose cards in your hand. Again, it is in formats where tempo is more important than the card advantage, like it would be in Commander. So there's that aspect as well. But I do kind of like now that Serum Powder has a little bit of more versatility. Before, it was kind of like only for jank decks in Modern. It was like, as nobody serious plays Serum Powder. Or is it played in ad nauseum decks?
I don't know.
Maybe it's played in ad nauseum. I don't think so, though.
I don't know. It's a $3 card, though.
But I do kind of like that because now it's making Serum Powder a little bit better because you have more options, more decisions. They may end up banning Serum Powder specifically because they don't want people to have to try to figure out how to do it. I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit too far. Maybe they're not that they're not that babying of a company. Who knows?
I don't know. Shouldn't be that hard to figure out because they gave you the answer in the article. Listen here, kid.
No, Frixie Walker needs to give us the math behind if it's good to go Serum Powder and then go lower specifically so you can Serum Powder stuff away.
I mean,
what's the math say?
It lets you see more cards. I don't know specifically on the math. I'd need more time than instant speed to run the math.
No. Math at instant speed. Quick maths. That's why they call it quick maths.
Quick maths.
No.
No quick maths.
This math is not simple math, sir.
What are you talking about? It's multiplication, addition, subtraction. Get over it.
2 + 2 = 4.
Stop trying to make it sound like your job's hard.
No, my job is not hard. Teaching high school math is not hard. This math is not high school math.
Someone record him next time he complains about his students.
I mean, if we were to clip every time that Frexen complains about teaching math, that would be our whole clips.
Yeah, we no longer have space for actual VODs.
Wow.
All right, so I kind of touched on this topic a little bit before, but we were talking about or rather I brought it up. I was talking about people who do kind of their own thing at their own table, and again, this is really just for Commander. Has anybody else ever run into that where like, you could kind of do your mulligans differently this way because we just want you to have a good game? Because I'll tell you right now, just as 2 examples, I'm sorry, I'll give you 3 examples actually. When we used to play over at my house back when we still lived in South Carolina, we would kind of pretty much say that like, hey, if you mulligan down to 5 and you still have a bad hand, just start over. Just shuffle, redraw 7. Because again, it's Commander and we're just playing at the kitchen table. There's no prizes on the line, nothing like that, nothing crazy. When I just recently went to my LGS, I was kind of just hanging out after work before I had to come home to get my kids. And there was a couple of people just 1v1ing Commander at the store, and the one guy turned around and put his hand down. He's like, "How do you want to do mulligans?" And the other guy looked at him, like his opponent looked at him and was like, "What do you mean? Like, do you not know how to mulligan?" And he's like, "Well, it's kind of whatever you want. I don't care if we do mulligans the normal way, if you have a thing that you like to do, blah blah blah." And they eventually worked it out to just do Vancouver, and they went off, and that was fine. So it's another instance where like the guy didn't even know if the normal way, like he didn't default to the normal way. He just was like, what do you do normally? I'll do whatever you want. And then my third example, I'm just going to say that for like the Magic Online Commander League episodes that we put up on youtube.com/Praetor Magic plug, we will restart the game if somebody has a bad hand. We'll restart the game if somebody goes like 6 turns in and doesn't do anything or doesn't draw anything to get out of a bad hand. So like we craft those games a little bit to be where everybody has a place at the table.
Right.
And that's and that kind of goes back to my first example where I was like, hey, if you get down to 5 hands and your hand sucks or like you only have 1 land and you don't want to obviously go to 4, start over. What do I care? It's the same kind of thing, except obviously the Commander League ones are more for entertainment value than just to have fun. Although we do have fun while we play, unless Frexen is playing, in which case we're miserable.
How is that the case?
Poor Frexen.
Valder came back.
Magic Online Commander League, I lose.
Valder came back and said nobody missed him. John said the immediate response was, "Have you seen the last 2 episodes? We're glad you're back." To which Valder responded like, "Well, yeah, you had 2 3-hour games. Maybe you guys do like having me here."
Neither of which were my fault.
You built one of the decks in one of those and played in one of those games. The Bush and... No, you didn't play the Bush or have anything to do with the Bushcrafty deck or game. So
I helped out Powder make the deck actually, but that I didn't
So
have
it was
anything
your fault.
to do with it. That's right.
All your fault. But anyway, getting back to the original topic. So,
Mm.
what do you guys do at your tables or events? I know, Hacker, I think you said that you pretty much only play online, right?
Well, now I do. Now I only play online, so it's just whatever it's on Magic Online, which is the free going down to 7, and then after that it's Vancouver Mulligan. But back when I played in paper, we kind of had like an unspoken rule where, especially if there was one guy specifically at our table, if we got down to 4 cards in our hand, or we had a mulligan past 5, he would be like, "Hey, bro," he put his hand on the table. He's like, "Just go up to 7. Just go up to 7." And everybody would be like, yeah, just go up to 7. No worries. And it was kind of like that was like the thing. But it wasn't like you knew that you could abuse it. So that if you would go down to 4 specifically so that you could go back up to 7. That's not how people did it. But it was kind of like just, because like you said, it was just a very friendly place.
Yeah.
But we did do like the official mulligan, kind of like how we do on Magic Online, with that as the only exception. Now, there are places that I've been, though, where they'll be like, all right, everybody, if you don't have enough lands in your hand, you can switch them out and go search for lands, put them into the, And I'm like, I was like very, very, I was even against partial mulligan because I would go to places like, hey, we still do partial Paris here. And I'm like, okay, like I felt bad because I didn't like the partial Paris mulligan. Like that's, when it comes to mulligans, that one I don't like. Other ones, I have my own like hierarchy, which I'd be kind of cool to see what you guys think like too, like where you like your mulligans. But yeah, that's all we had.
I like the one where I get to pick 7 cards to keep in my hand so I can just win the game.
Is that the one where X equals 7 for that X tutor thing? What is it called? Diabolic Revelation?
No,
X equals 7?
that's just how the mulligan works. Everybody pick their best 7 cards. Let's see who wins first.
That'd be kind of fun to play as a
No, no, it wouldn't. It depends.
Dude, it would.
I guess it depends on like.
Because in most decks, that would be whoever played first wins.
I mean, in like competitive decks, maybe, but like my Edgar deck doesn't win turn 4, and it like then you have people who will start being smart about it, and they'll hold up, like they'll go tutor up disruption, because it depends on it. Do you do the tutor before or after the commander reveal? If you do it before,
probably
it's a little bit harder. You have to play a little bit safer. If you do it after, you can kind of metagame a little bit.
Because technically, you're supposed to choose decks. No, actually, no. You choose decks, then the commanders are revealed, and then you draw your 7. Yeah, you do have information about commanders when you mulligan. When the last time I checked, I believe.
I mean, we're talking about fake mulligan rules here, so that's why I'm saying, what would you do in that scenario?
Yeah, I would keep it the way it is.
Mick says the first mulligan is free. After that, you can buy a free one by doing a shot. I would like to play your games.
That's too much of a downside for me. I would not be able to play well.
You're like 12, so you're not even allowed to drink.
Wait, what?
You're like 12.
Nah, dude.
You heard him. He didn't stutter.
Nah, dude.
I didn't stutter.
Nah, dude. No, I know I got a baby face, but I ain't 12.
What about you, Frexine?
We can't see his face.
Yeah, we can't see. Well, no, not that. What?
We're talking about mulligans here, sir, not faces.
In terms of what do you normally do at your table, especially you, actually, because you play Commander with your students, right?
Yeah, I mean, we just do the normal Vancouver.
Okay.
That was the saddest I've ever heard.
The one rule we do have at the school is that if you ever reveal your hand and you have 0
or 7,
like 0 lands out of, like, no, it just in general, even if you had mulled down to 6, if you reveal your hand and showed that you had 0 lands in the cards, you get another mulligan for free. That is the one.
At the same amount you had?
At the same amount. So yeah. So if you had like 6 and reveal your hand and you show that you had 0 lands in your hand, like say, hey, I had no lands, then you can shuffle back up and we let you go for 6 again.
Yeah.
Or if you do it at 7, then you
do you
can show your hand at 7 and be like, shuffle up and do 7 again.
Yeah.
Now, I got a question for you, Friction. If that were made official, that would be pretty abusable, right?
It's only if you have 0 lands, though.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's say you play a deck where, I know this is kind of a silly suggestion, but let's say you just play all the amazing 1-drops in Modern and you only play 1 land. And so you only have 1 land in your deck.
Modern has enough land destruction where that would be a bad idea.
Well, maybe that's a little bit of a kind of really far out there, but that's kind of the idea I was going for. You play a very low to the ground deck, and then if
I
you
mean,
don't have one land at all,
I
then you're
wouldn't
not
I
punished.
wouldn't suggest it for a competitive format at all. We're talking about playing with a bunch of high
Right.
school kids who are spending, $10 on a deck and
No, I was
you
just kind
know
of I was
or
just playing
just
devil's advocate.
or have gotten the one of the event decks or one of the,
Yeah.
deconstructed decks for Christmas and have just tweaked it a little bit based on cards
Right.
that myself or the other teacher who runs it have given them.
Do they take out
So
lands to put the new cards in?
we literally build decks like where we've restricted ourselves to like a $10 budget or like don't use rares or stuff like that,
Mhm.
just so our decks can even be moderately competitive with the decks they haven't built.
Right.
And even then, we can still stomp them 98% of the time, but
Mm,
just because we know more about Magic and are better at deck building.
yep.
But
Poor
You're,
students. Poor
so, I
students.
mean, I
Oh, they
haven't
got
seen
to.
the case because it's very casual that you aren't seeing, and what it does do though is it prevents a lot of that feel bad feeling of getting mana screwed like completely. Or if they do, you can kind of be like, well, it's yourself,
Mhm.
But
you have
Yeah.
it does
people
prevent
who
a lot of that.
you have people who don't use it and like try to draw out of it, or has everybody kind of adopted it as like this is the best thing to do? Like, how long did it take for you to really get them to understand why the rule was in place?
I mean, I think we still have kids who try try for the greedy keeps and stuff. Or they're like, oh, I have this one card that I really, really like, even if it's a 5-drop, and they're like, I don't want to throw this one card away because I'm really attached to this one card,
Mm.
and just hope they draw enough lands. That's kind of the mentality of a new Magic player, though, of like, oh, I have
Being
this one
emotionally
card, and
attached.
I'm emotionally attached to being able to play this one really cool card that's in my deck because I only have one really cool card. So, you know.
Because I only have one cool card. Wow, pooping.
I
on
mean,
the
some of them
student.
that's very much the truth, though. I mean, it's
Mm.
not mean, it's not anything else. They're just starting out, and they don't
Mm.
have a collection or anything to pull from, and they don't have a lot of money to go buying Magic cards. So, you know
Tell them to
what?
get
They
a
have one
job.
or two cool cards that they've put in their deck, and they want to be able to play them as often as possible.
No. Tell them to get an after school job, and then play Magic, and then they'll be drug free the rest of their lives. That's the
Is
thing.
that the new plan?
I mean, if it works, but it's stupid, it ain't stupid.
That's
They
fair
should
enough.
they should make that an official public school anti-drug. I like
Mm, I
make
think
everybody
not.
addicted to Magic the Gathering. They'll have money
Everyone
for
get addicted to this instead. Everybody.
get
Hey, this
cardboard
doesn't
crack.
affect your physical health anyway. Your mental health. Magic destroys my mental health on like a weekly basis.
I
Pretty
thought it
much
improves it.
every
I mean, something
Friday
has
that
to, right?
Frexian joins games.
I'm sorry, sir. I know this Friday was rough for you, but there are
The
plenty of
first,
games I joined that you guys win.
the first game was fine. It was the second game where I was like, God damn it. When we didn't get rid of a skull clamp when we had the opportunity.
That wasn't my fault either. I don't control the bad plays other people make. Okay? It might seem like I do sometimes, but I don't.
How much are you paying the players that join our games, Frexian?
I didn't even advise him on what to target there. He just did that
How
all on his
much
own.
are you paying him?
It wasn't like I need to blow up 3 things. What should I blow up? And I'd be like, my Hedron archive and DM's Burnish Heart and that guy's thing. You want to be fair.
Yeah.
Just hit a bunch of mana rocks, quote unquote.
That Burnished Heart had a life. It had a wife and kids.
It did.
I mean, not after that game, because I ripped it up and threw it out for underperforming. But
And if Cookie had seen the wife and kids, you would have targeted them too.
oh god, no. Oh,
But
God.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think mulliganing, man, it's a thing. I think I really do like the new system. Like, I want to hate it because I'm one of those. I guess I said, I think this was like in our chat earlier, that I'm like the crotchety old man who's like, get off my lawn and leave my Magic alone, and just I kind of the mentality you were talking about earlier about like when things are constantly changing and shifting.
Yeah.
It can be good as long as there are changes for the better, but at the same time, it always has that slight negative, at least, of like when things are constantly changing and shifting, you're constantly having to adjust to the changes.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult to maintain a player base and to cultivate a new player base when you're playing one of those shifting sands type situations. So I really don't want to like it, but at the same time, I do think on the whole, it's probably going to be a positive.
For all formats?
I think even for all formats, yeah. I don't like the fact that they could end up having to ban cards because of it, but I mean, if they do, they do. And there are probably some cards that are due for a ban anyway, honestly, in certain formats. Like,
I mean,
people have been trying to get certain Tron pieces banned for a long time, and they're still around.
They still haven't banned Nexus of Fate in every format, just best of one on Arena.
Yeah.
Which still makes no goddamn sense to me, but that's a completely different podcast too. Anyway, what about you, Hacker? You're aye or nay?
For the London Mulligan, I was gonna do, if it's okay with you guys, I was gonna do like a hierarchy of my least to most favorite Mulligan, because there's 4 right now. My least favorite it being Partial Paris. Right above that, that's the Paris Mulligan. That's the one we had before the Vancouver Mulligan. And then I like the Vancouver Mulligan more than the Paris Mulligan, but I think London Mulligan's my favorite so far. I even wrote a long time ago on Reddit about like how I wish that was the real Mulligan rule, because it's still a downward. You lose advantage by mulliganing, but it's not as a drastic downward thing. Because with the current Mulligan, even Vancouver, the more you mulligan, the harder it is to keep hands, and I think that's what makes it so hard.
Yeah.
The poor get poorer, the rich get richer.
I do want to mention that there was actually a variant of this, the London Mulligan, once upon a time in the past that they tested,
Oh, really?
and they decided not to do it. Yeah.
Oh.
They
What was
kinda,
the difference, you know?
No, because it was when I was not playing. I found about it through people talking about it. But apparently, yeah, they tested something very similar to this and decided not to go with it, and I cannot remember the reason. I remember reading the reason, and now the words are just blank in my brains.
I mean, I really see the biggest problem to the London Mulligan being just the fact it is going to encourage more Mulligan, and you might see like increases in tournament times and play times because of it.
That's true.
I think that's really like the biggest problem that I could see, and the biggest negative I could see, less than it like breaking into formats or causing any huge trouble, because I really think in 9 times out of 10 we panic as Magic players about these things, but then we see the meta adjust and it's just like, oh yeah. Or if something does get too out of hands and you end up in that deck A, deck B, they'll come down with the band cannon and they'll knock some cards off and they'll fix the problem.
Yeah.
It might not be great that the problem happens, but it'll get fixed, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
or the meta will adjust itself to some of these, you know, some of the more minor changes that are going to come from the Mulligan system. The biggest thing I see really is the time constraints of like, because it's statistically better to mulligan more, people are going to mulligan more looking for those better hands. That's more shuffling, more deciding. When you're looking at those 7 cards, it's more time being like, oh, I'm brainstorming these. I'm Sensei Divining topping these. Which one do I want to put on the bottom? Which one do I want to leave in my hand? Which one do I want? I think that's the problem I see more than anything else, is just that extra time that it could potentially be, you know, on the front end of the game, like before you actually even get to playing.
Yeah.
See, that's how they're going to get you when they go to best of one even in paper. Again, another podcast. I'm very salty about the best of one thing. I'm sorry.
I like it personally. A best of one, I think, is basically what Commander is, anyways. We're not playing best of 3 in Commander.
Again, Commander's not a competitive format.
Yeah, I don't like best of one either for competitive formats. Yeah. I don't like the fact.
I'm the exception
again. There are people who don't like being able to sideboard, but I don't like the fact that you're negating a lot of the strategy behind playing Magic. It really best of one. We can really delve into this topic later, but best of one really does just make it more of a like chance of who you play thing as opposed to actual strategy.
And it does make the game more racy. Like, how quick can I win? Because now I don't have to worry about a game 2 where they can try to disrupt me.
Yeah.
If I kill him now, the game is over. Which you would think, me, right? Like, I'm the aggro-y player, or the spiky player, you would think I'd like it, but I
play Boros.
Yeah, you would get
That's
people
what they're trying
who
to do. They're trying to make you play Boros.
Someone clip that.
They get your Legion War bosses, people.
Clip this whole thing. They couldn't make Boros better, so they changed the game. That's how bad Boros is. I made a Boros comment the other day, and Danny's like, I'm gonna make a Boros deck just to wreck you with, and I'm like, I don't know, you're gonna have to play Magic first.
Oh.
Boom.
Ooh.
Got her.
Because if you're playing Boros, you're not playing Magic. That's the joke. You need to do things in order to play Magic, and Boros,
Thank you for the explanation.
You're probably just gonna look at your cards and then be like sad.
Thank you for the explanation. we needed it.
I didn't want people to think like, oh, it's because they don't play in paper a lot or whatever. It's like, no, I'm crapping on Boros, not my lack of a play group. Thanks for making me sad for thinking about it now. All right. It
So
sounds like
what about you guys?
Well, no. Well, Phyrexian said he was pretty much
Yeah.
for it. I'm gonna wait for the testing. I can never predict what the changes are gonna bring until I see it in action. Again, my decks felt more consistent, but that was just goldfishing, and I was only goldfishing to get my opening hand. I didn't play them. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that's gonna factor in because I'm bottoming cards that I don't want to see right now.
Right.
So, and
And
even
then later
then,
on,
if
you said, "Man, I really wanted to see that."
right. Well, I mean, just in general, because it's also a difference in mentality. I mean, I could just be doing it terribly. You know, that's another factor. So,
I think totally in Commander too. When you're in a singleton format, it's like if I bottom this card, do I not want to see it for the rest of the game, or at least until I shuffle up again for some shuffle effect?
Fetch land.
I shuffle quite a lot, especially in like Muldrotha. So I don't know. In Lord Windgrace too. I fetch a lot of lands in Lord Windgrace, Phyrexian.
A lot of lands, huh?
All the lands.
I was going to ask you guys, what do you guys think about the other mulligans? The Paris mulligan, which was the one we had before Vancouver, the partial Paris, which is the one that was kind of like made for Commander, and the Vancouver mulligan. Do you guys have a favorite of those three?
I think we should go back to the very first mulligan rule.
The Paris mulligan?
No, the very first mulligan rule was you could only mulligan if you had no lands in hand or 7 lands in hand,
or
if your opponent had mulliganed for that reason. Just true, pure, raw, statistical hell.
Yeah.
You're back on this old man shtick again.
I actually would kind of like that, though. That doesn't sound too bad to me.
No, it was horrible. It's horrible from
Is
what
it
I've
really?
heard. I wasn't
never
playing
played it
Magic
before.
back then, but
Because that means
what
you
I've
have to
heard
keep
was terrible.
one-landers.
Yeah, you literally have to keep one-landers.
Oh, no, I thought I heard it was like it was 0
No.
or 1 or 6 or
No,
7.
0 or
7.
7 was the
Oh,
rule.
really?
Yes.
What if
And
it was
then you
0,
could
1,
mulligan if your
7?
opponent mulliganed. So if you had a one-land hand and they had a 0,
Then you were
you
lucky.
just mulligan out of your one-land hand.
Yeah. Now, what if it was 0, 1, 6, or 7? So it was all those as options.
Too much. That's too much for
too
to
complicated.
teach, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think
It
it's
sounds simple to
pretty easy.
us because we're talking about like 4 different kinds of mulliganing, but for somebody else, you have to be like, okay, so how many lands do you have? Do you have 1, 0, 6, or 7? They're gonna look at you like, why? Like, why? What do you need to know that for? And it's like, well, I need to tell you if your hand's bad. How do you why?
Yeah.
It would just be like a 5-minute thing of me talking to my kids of why.
And it also kind of like forces you to only be able to play certain types of like if you don't want to keep 2 land hands and you'd be okay keeping a 6, then it kind of forces you have to build your deck where 2 lands in your opening hand is okay and you're not allowed to mulligan after that. So I guess maybe now that I've asked it, I see the issues.
Yeah, it would probably.
So what
affect
you're
deck
saying
building
is you
too
should have
much.
thought about your question first.
No, sometimes we have to just ask and see where the conversation goes.
Yeah,
right?
sometimes you gotta just throw it and see where the shit sticks.
I thought we were a family friendly stream, Seth.
I'm in the military. That's about as family friendly as I get.
All
right.
His name
Well-
is Seth for us, everyone. If you want.
For that, or on that note, let's get out of here before we get demonetized. So, magical hack. Actually, never mind. Phyrexian, I'm sure you have all kinds of social media. Let's get you out of the way first.
That's right. I have all the social media in the world by not having any of the social media.
Find
Makes
him
sense to me.
on the Discord.
Find me on the Discord.
at
Praetor
Phyrexian
Magic.
Walker 03.
Yes.
And that link should
Phyrexian
be
Walker.
either below the video, below the stream, or in the description of the podcast if you want to join us when we talk about Magic, 3DH, anime, wrestling, Pokemon, video games, and all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah.
All right,
It's a good,
now
it's a
Hacker
fun
can
time.
have his turn.
Turn for
Yeah.
what?
Where's your social
Talk
media,
about
there, buddy?
your social
Oh.
media stuff, the stuff you actually have, unlike me.
Well, you can find literally everything all at one page. Tappedout.net/users/magical hacker. There you can find a link to my YouTube, a link to my Twitch, a link to my Twitter, a link to the resources that I make for Commander, a link to everything. You can just read that page and you'll see everything. And I made it as short as I possibly can because Seth got mad at me for taking too much time at the end of every podcast with this.
So what you're saying is if people go to read this page, they're going to sit there for a 3-page introduction to you? Is that what it is?
No, unless they want it, in which case I can link them to the long version.
Is there really a long version? Please tell me
Of course there's a long version.
There's like a Google Docs of
course
like
there is.
5-page introduction
Google
of
Doc.
this is my kind of content. This is my philosophy on Commander. Blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah,
it
blah,
is
blah,
actually
blah.
a Google Doc where I have everything there, but I don't know if I deleted it or not.
There's
But
an
I did have
essay.
a long version.
This guy wrote an essay on what he thinks about Commander. All right.
Yeah.
For us, you can, of course, join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at twitch.tv/Praetor Magic. Except for this week, it's going to be Thursday because a lot of people said they're usually available on Thursdays and not Fridays, so we're going to give it a try. If you're watching this any other time other than the week that it comes out, it might change. So who knows? Watch another episode, I guess. You can also find us on youtube.com/Praetor Magic, twitter.com/Praetor Magic, facebook.com/Praetor Magic, and instagram.com/Praetor Magic. Again, if you are watching the recording of this, go down below if you are looking for a playmat, mousepad, or dice bag, and get the link to our sponsors over at Inked Gaming. Using that link supports us because we get kickbacks from it. And of course, remember you're using the Praetor 10% off, PRAETOR10. Your 10% off, again, supports us. Right now, our giveaways are actually done. I don't have to say giveaways and stuff. Well, except for the one where if you go to youtube.com/Praetor Magic and share any one of those video links on social media with hashtag MOCL, you are entered in for a chance to win a Commander Versus playmat from our friends over at Star City Games, where when we hit 400 and 500 subscribers on YouTube, which you do have to be a subscriber on YouTube in order for this to work, basically, once we hit those numbers, we're going to give 2 playmats away each time. So we have 4 playmats left. I have to give away the people who won at 300, and we gave away when we hit 200. So, and that should be about it. So join me on Wednesday. I'm going to be brewing another 3D8 deck on my way to get the 32 challenge done. I have 3 decks in: Rishkar, Alicia, and Kari Zev. So I'm going to brew something new on Wednesday, and then Thursday we're going to play. And hopefully I'm going to kill Phyrexian with it. Just Phyrexian. I can lose the game as long as I kill Phyrexian. Right?
That's fine with me.
Why would you want to kill me?
I'm not going to answer ridiculously obvious questions. If
That's
people have
horrible.
listened to this podcast, they have an hour's worth of evidence on why I want it. All right. That's it from us, guys. Any last words from you two?
I don't know why I should die.
Go
I do
London.
nothing. All I do is take advantage of the bad plays of others.
God
Psych
damn.
Rift and leaving Skull Clamp in play. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah, the Psych Rift. Oh, God, we're not talking about this anymore. All right. That's it, y'all. See you on Wednesday. Peace.